Welcome to the review video for our subject of Greece on the World History 1 SOL. Okay, so here's Greece. It's located on the Balkan Peninsula. It's a peninsula, so it's surrounded by water on three sides. And the most important of those bodies of water is the Mediterranean Sea. Across from Greece is Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, and this area became really important later in Greek history because of some conflicts that Greece had with other empires that ruled this area. Eventually, Greece was conquered by the king of Macedonia, King Philip II. Greece is very mountainous. Mountains covered a large part of the terrain of ancient Greece. This meant that there wasn't a lot of room to farm, and there was rugged, hilly terrain. It was hard to get across. You couldn't grow very much there. The mountains kept people separate, so they developed governments that were closer to where they lived that didn't require moving far away. And eventually, those independent city-states had conflicts with each other. Greeks were polytheistic. They practiced a religion that included many different gods. Zeus is one of the most important of those gods to know. He was the king of the gods, along with his queen, Hera. Zeus's symbol is the lightning bolt. Hera is the goddess of the home and domesticity. Another important goddess that you should know is Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who was the patron goddess of Athens, one of the most powerful city-states in Greece. So Athens and Sparta were the two most powerful city-states in ancient Greece. Athens was largest. They went through many phases of government. They started with a monarchy ruled by a king. Then they were an aristocracy where the rich people ruled. Then they were a tyranny where some individuals held power. And eventually they settled into a direct democracy where citizens voted on laws. Greek citizens were well educated. Boys went to school starting at about age 7, and they studied the liberal arts, the same things in school that you guys do. Athens had a very strong navy. It was located right on the water, so it made sense that they had a strong navy. Sparta was very militaristic. They were focused on military training. Girls had some military training, but boys went away to military school when they were quite young, and stayed and lived in the military barracks until they were adult men. They trained to be warriors. And these two city-states united together in a war, but eventually fought a war against each other, which Sparta won. So the first war that the Greeks fought was the Persian War. So in this war, the Persian Empire, which controlled most of the land over here, was upset about some Greek colonies along its coastline. And so they came to get Greece, and they were planning to conquer it and make it part of their empire. However, the Greek city-states united, and at a couple of key battles, particularly Marathon, which is related to the word marathon today for the race that we run, and the Battle of Salamis, which was a naval battle. It was fought with ships. Those two key battles were the battles in which the Greeks stopped the Persian invasion and they were able to maintain their independence. Athens, as a result of this war and the organization that they had done for the war, became the most powerful of the city-states. And after the war, Athens entered its golden age, its period where it was having its greatest achievement in arts and sciences. Athens had been burnt by the Persians, so Pericles, an Athenian general, organized the rebuilding of Athens, and he became the great statesman of the Athenian Golden Age. One thing that they did that the other city-states didn't like very much was to use the money from an alliance they created called the Delian League in order to pay for the rebuilding of Athens. And that action was part of what made people start to resent Athens and start conflict between the city-states. One of the greatest achievements of the Athenian Golden Age was the building of the Parthenon. The Parthenon is a huge temple to the goddess Athena that was built on top of the Athenian Acropolis, which was the military and religious fortress at a high point in the city. Back in the day, there was a giant statue of Athena in the middle of this temple, designed by the sculptor Phidias. So people were mad at Athens because they were taking people's money. They were getting too powerful. People didn't like them. Sparta was the most powerful of the Athenian enemies, and they formed their own alliance called the Peloponnesian League, and eventually the Delian League, led by Athens, and the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, fought each other in their own war. Sparta won, but everyone was weakened as a result. So when you are super weak from fighting a civil war, a war against your own people, it is easy for other people to come in and take over your civilization. And that's what happened to the Greeks. Just to the north of Greeks was a place called Macedonia, which was ruled by a king named Philip II, and he had had his eye on Greece for a long time. He came down with his army and he conquered the weakened Greek city-states. He was poisoned and died shortly after, but his son Alexander went on to conquer the entirety of the Persian Empire and further south into Egypt. And because of all this land that he conquered, he is known as Alexander the Great. He named a whole bunch of cities after himself. So if you look at this map, you'll see lots and lots of cities called Alexandria. And that's because he named them after himself. All right, we're going to look at some individuals from Greece whose names you should recognize along with their accomplishments. All right, we have the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And you can remember them by the acronym SPA, S-P-A. So these were all philosophers who questioned people's assumptions. They wanted people to use logic to find answers to questions. Plato believed that there was an ideal version of the world that we were all just living in essentially a copy of. Aristotle was the private tutor to Alexander the Great. The Athenians in particular were great playwrights, and they loved the theater. And Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides are the three great Athenian playwrights. They wrote tragic plays where terrible, terrible things happened. People murdered their children and parents and had affairs unknowingly with their mothers. It was pretty bad stuff. And then we have historians. The two great Greek historians are Herodotus and Thucydides. And from Herodotus and Thucydides, we get the ideas that people should record history accurately and that we should learn from history so that we do not repeat it. The last Greek accomplishment that you need to know and recognize are the Greek column orders. So most Greek buildings were based around these three orders, and they determined not just what the columns looked like that held up the buildings, but all the proportions of the buildings themselves. So Corinthian came from Corinth. The Doric columns came from the area around Athens, and then the Ionic columns came from Ionia across the Aegean Sea. All right, that is it for your slides and your Edpuzzle. Thank you guys.